We have people join, and we'll begin in just a moment.
Welcome, everyone. While we wait, I wanted to let you know about an upcoming webinar that the Secular Student Alliance will be hosting. Jeff Hawkins will discuss his new book, 1,000 Brains, which heralds a revolution in the understanding of intelligence. It is a big think book in every sense of the word, unveiling a theory of intelligence that will revolutionize our understanding of the brain and the future of AI. So if you're interested in that, please check out the chat. We'll be sharing some links on how to register. Also, I wanted to invite everyone to participate in the Secular Student Alliance virtual conference, which will take place from May 15th to the 16th. It is free to attend and all are welcome. And we will also have some information in the chat about the conference. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. I see some new people have joined us, so I'd like to make a couple of announcements again. I'd like to invite you to another webinar that the Secular Student Alliance is hosting on Tuesday, April 6th. Jeff Hawkins will discuss his new book, 1,000 Brains, which heralds a revolution in the understanding of intelligence. It is a big think book in every sense of the word, unveiling a theory of intelligence that will revolutionize our understanding of the brain and the future of AI. Also, I want to give a plug to the Secular Student Alliance Conference. Everyone is invited to participate in our virtual conference. It will take place from May 15th to the 16th. It's free to attend and all are welcome. Check out the chat. The registration links will be added soon. And we will get started in one moment. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome a colleague and a wonderful human being, Christian Hayden, to present his talk on dynamic humanism, a really interesting subject that I am looking forward to hearing about. Christian Hayden is a facilitator, writer, and aspiring media maker. He roots himself in the connection and engagement of Black and humanist communities. He is born in Brooklyn, New York, and is based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Christian is currently serving as a clergy intern with Ethical Society of St. Louis. He hopes to build bridges between various communities and movements through thought, reflection, and action. Christian earned a BA from the College of Worcester in Urban Studies and served on the inaugural team of the Humanist Service Corps, which is now Humanist Action in Ghana. So welcome, Christian, and take it away.
Thank you, Louise. Hello, all. Just wanted to share today a little bit about some of my thoughts on humanism and what I mean by a dynamic humanism or imagining a dynamic humanism and something that can hold multiple paths towards such. And I use the article here because I'm a little bit inspired by Felix Adler, who wrote a book called I'm thinking about the subtitle, which is An Ethical Philosophy of Life, and using the end to make it not definitive, but a presentation of an idea. So that's why I added the A article there. But today I want to talk about or ask the question, what is a humanism that we don't know, but continuously seek to find? I gather many come to humanism because it echoes what they already believed, but possibly lack the word for. And some come to humanism because it's closer than anything else to capturing their understanding of the material world, as well as holding a container for what they imagine as social justice. When I say humanism, maybe to a too broad extent, I'm including all folks in terms of who might come to this meeting, folks who might lean non-theist or secular or atheist. But I want to ground it in the word humanism today. For me, the most inspiring humanism comes not from what maybe feels like mine or what I think humanism is, but rather what shows me more about the world and how others frame and describe their attachment to their inviolability or inherent worth, the narratives they build to support it. I keep coming back to a text that haunts and inspires me, which is Toni Morrison's Beloved. It haunts me because it artfully shows the threat of unmet and unhealed grief and generational trauma. That which birthed this country, that which birthed my people. The novel continuously plays with the idea of home, freedom, and faith. From the novel is set in 1873 in Cincinnati, sort of border community, where newly freed slaves are trying to figure out what it means to be human. And the community that they're forming has challenges, and they're carrying with them, like I said, this grief, this loss, this generational trauma. And it's Big Shug's, who's sort of the grandmother figure, maternal, container of sort of the comfort of the community, who gives this speech at something called the Clearing, which is this meeting space for the whole community, young, old, in the middle, right? For them to explore the vast expanse of what it means to be who they are at this moment. Over yonder, love it hard. Yonder, they do not love your flesh. They despise. It. They don't love your eyes. They just as soon pick them out. No more do they love the skin on your back. Yonder, they flay it. And oh, my people, they do not love your hands. Those they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands, love them. Raise them up and kiss them. Touch others with them, pat them together, stroke them on your face, because they don't love that either. You got to love it, you. And no, they ain't in love with your mouth. Yonder, over there, they will see it broken and break it again. What you say out of it, they will not heed. What you scream from it, they do not hear. What you put in to nourish your body, they will snatch away and give you leavings instead. No, they don't love your mouth. You got to love it. This is flesh I'm talking here. Flesh that needs to be loved. If you notice in the picture I'm sharing, it is from the lynching memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, where after being led through structures and sort of monuments dedicated to those who lost their lives, you come upon this quote from Beloved, written by Toni Morrison. What moves me about this passage is that it shows no concern of being like, the clearing shows no concern with being an actual structure, an institution, or being tied to a space. But it's a spirituality, or rather an orientation that's based in love, that starts simply in love. I think it asks, or it makes me think, well, what is the context that this is a kind of love that has to be advocated or spoken? Why is this important to me? Why do I find something moving, something in and of for me in this expression of love? When I think about that this was put at the memorial to remember folks who were lynched, thousands of known and unknown victims, I think of the indifference and outward violence towards Black bodies, which would call for the need for a community to center or cherish their own selves, to develop a kind of articulation around loving oneself, every part of oneself. It's something it's so clear and simple, but is radical at the same time. What this moves me to do is to think about, well, where do folks find this need or define this need to be loved? How do they come to it? Where is one's humanity being denied? And where have then thus folks found and discovered that the answer is a type of love? Or learning, or connecting, or growing. There's a book called Matagari by Ngozi Thiongo that has a mysterious protagonist who may or may not exist, but the questions he asks, where can he find truth and justice, are provocative ones. Because truth and justice are never where they're supposed to be. They are not in the courts, they're not in the church, and they're not in the schools. So where are they to be found? Or rather, what should they look like? What character or shape do they take? A character says in the book, "My dear wanderer, you can never find answers where nobody lives. Truth and justice are to be found in people's actions. Right and wrong are embedded in what people do. And even among the people, you still have a problem in finding the answers to your questions. Do you know why? Let me whisper in your ear. It is fear. There's too much fear in this country." The place where this is taking place is in Kenya, which is in the sort of crux of becoming independent or realizing independence. But they are dealing with similar questions of what is the worth of their land? What is their land? What is their purpose? What honors that? Who honors that? And so the other thing that's really important about this book is, even though I read it in English, it was written in Kikuyu, which is the sort of traditional language that was spoken by the author. And what that kind of tells me, or asks us to think about why it would be important to try to express and find these ideals in a context where they were maybe sort of imposed, or the idea of what they might be were imposed, suggested, economically, and maybe also politically enforced. It makes me feel like I need to constantly ask the question, or seek to find the definition of words which I think I know. I've been taught I know. Democracy, civility, freedom. What do they mean? I think as humanists, skeptics, non-theists, atheists, secularists, we should be skeptical of everything, skeptical of our skepticism. Can the ideas we find important, the way they are currently defined, hold or be realized in the future that we need? And to that sort of brings me to that kind of this sort of last part about thinking about the constant need to be creating and crafting these definitions and these words, these ideas, but then also these futures. And so I wrote this piece as kind of an exercise in imagining the person I wanted to be, imagining what freedom looked like to me. This is called To Return as a Process. I met my future self. He had skin like mine, but he moved differently. He floated with the pace of steps of the ancestors, draped in the fabric of possibility that wrapped behind him. He laughed in Ga and thought in Ewe and sang in Fafra. He had returned so many times, there was no separation between him and home. His head was dust covered, but only gently. He had restless eyes because his malaria medicine robbed him of sleep, but he was at peace, seeking you, seeking him, seeking us. Multitudes contained within, wrapped and signified in skin, I return. My feet meet the soil where life begins, I return. I am a lover and the future is my muse, I return. I sat in a hut somewhere along the river Oti, and I greeted a man with power and skin, dark, slow, like a father of time. He said, welcome home. I read the passages of elders who dreamt of this moment. I didn't cry, but something welled up inside of me, welcome home. When I left the first time, it had been years since I cried, but it was then when I realized to return is a process. What happens, or what happened when you returned? Thousands of Black people now have the experience of return. They made a lie of a door in Cape Coast, which is a slave castle, and there's a door, this called the Door of No Return. That's a famous thing that they said the last thing that slaves saw as they went to the beach to the ships to be brought to the New World, quote unquote. We had the opportunity to come to ourselves, with ourselves, for ourselves, tasted what freedom might look like. You returned. No war, no projects of salvation, just a vision, an idea, a future offered to be imagined. You returned. Did your fingers nearly singe from fresh fufu? Did the drip from lye soup spoil your new garb? Did someone lead you across the market through threads of relations and tongues to find what you were looking for? Did somebody who looked like you smile when you choked on akwateshi? Did someone take your hand as you danced to Afro beats, mirroring the joy you held as rebellion? Did your eyes linger on a coconut seller who looked like your cousin? You returned. And they are returning too, learning new paths to old ways, to different kinds and ways of being. A woman dares to touch her partner who is almost her mirror image. She represents a portal, a new way to an old tradition. One of our mothers said that those that love those that look like themselves were the ones that saw the world in a new way. They had a place, a role. Everyone has a place and a role. She held her lover with hair like hair like hers, close like a vision that felt far but near. In going forward, they see the past too. To return is a process. I held him, future me, even as I awoke, as if to summon him into life, to make my future meet him, meet me. So I want to conclude with a little bit of a sort of background and context for that piece. I found it very interesting that at the same time that the United States, or folks in the United States, were kind of acknowledging sort of 400 years or 1619 as a sort of chosen date of the first Africans coming to continental United States. Some argue with whether that's accurate. But at that time, there was also this simultaneous invitation. Some would say a tourist tourism marketing scheme, but this invitation across the diaspora for Black folks to come to Ghana. And that was compelling to me to think about and reflect as someone who had been back to Ghana or been to Ghana multiple times before and had these experiences that gave me a kind of different connection with my humanism or my concept of humanism, or sort of expanded what it might mean. And one of the sort of that thing that I wanted to hone in on was the specificity of not just saying, oh, I'm going back to Africa or I'm going to Ghana, but trying to find out the particularities of different ethnicities, the different histories, different ways, so that it was deeper than an aesthetic sort of choice, but rather something grounded in full knowing. But then also recognizing that there's an immense privilege that is hard to articulate, sort of sometimes can be hard, difficult to articulate. Being African American, having the passport privilege of being able to go to different places in the world, while at the same time in your own country, sort of feeling like a continuous outsider, an enemy, if you will. And so this sort of feeling of being able to go to Ghana, but to sort of try to find a way to sort of meet some of the things that I was expressing earlier in terms of the beloved, this sort of generational trauma, what does healing look like, reconnecting. And then also the constant questioning of what does freedom look like? What does freedom look like if I can move, but there are folks, or sort of millions of folks, who are living in countries that don't have the privilege or ability to move? But then also the experiences of folks who are queer, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and the danger they face in this place that I also experienced what I would call freedom. And why was it be important to tie my concept of freedom, or my desire, or my searching, or my reaching for, with theirs. And so trying to find a vision of myself to connect to in the future and try to reconcile continuously. But understanding that that is also me tying myself to other folks and their attempt to also be free. So I'll kind of end on and invite questions or responses. Or where does your humanism find love? Where does your humanism reach for recognition of the other? Where does your humanism search and refine what it is and what it sees? And then lastly, what futures does your humanism imagine?
Thank you very much, Christian, for that personal and touching talk. I really found it very interesting. And one of the things that I instantly think about when you ask these questions is, you mentioned Felix Adler, who is the founder of ethical culture. And he had kind of this saying or golden rule to act in the way to elicit the best in others and therefore elicit the best in yourself. But there was a second part to that is kind of lesser known, and it is to kind of seek out and embrace the otherness of others, and then therefore embrace the otherness of yourself. So that's kind of my thoughts on where I find love. It's in others, and that's, being in community. But I really appreciate this very personal perspective of humanism that you've shared. I want to invite people to include questions in the chat or comments for Christian. And I'm sorry, I might have cut you off. I didn't mean to.
I wanted to sort of also in a sense respond. One of the things that has kind of been coming up in conversations a lot is sort of being able to recognition of the other. Mm-hmm. And there's this quote by Lewis Gordon that kind of talks about a little bit about what are the challenges of humanism as in sort of liberalism. And he says that it relies on symmetry. Right. So it's like there's the things that we are aiming to do with each other, right? In terms of have these conversations, these dialogue, explore justice and go through conflict, but it relies on symmetry. And if that symmetry isn't there, if we're not on the same level, then it's impossible to see the otherness of a person. So recognize their fullness and worth and things like that. To realize those greater goals for the ethical to emerge. Mm-hmm. And so I like you, that Felix Adler's mantra, I don't know if mantra is appropriate, but let's go with it, right? Inspires me, but it also is humbling, because it's to get to that point where I can trust that your best, recognize the sort of the best in the other, has to bring out the best in yourself. I have to trust that your best is actually in my best interest. Mm-hmm. And I can't be sure of that if I don't feel like you recognize who I am. I can't be sure of that if you don't know where I'm coming from or what I'm concerned about. And I frame a lot of these things in a sort of philosophical, intellectual way, but it's also, these are very material things too. It's are you concerned that what my housing, all these other things, right? That are important before I can trust that we can build that kind of reciprocal relationship.
Right, and I think that speaks to the importance of amplifying the voices of minorities and people of color. And that's, historically, that's a tradition of ethical culture, to give a platform so that we can listen and that we can understand. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about humanism, is we're all free to believe whatever we want, but then you come together in community and you agree that you want to build a better world for your children and yourself and for all of humanity. But I think listening, kind of what you're speaking to, listening is very important and a really great place to start, because without that, you cannot build the trust. So we do have a question. How do you think humanism is embracing the growing diversity of the United States?
So I think that's a good question, which is like, well, what humanism are we talking about? What humanism are we talking about in the SSA? Are we talking about in the AHA? Are we talking about in Humanist International? And also being aware of what we mean by diversity. Because in my mind, the United States has always been like diverse. I think the question is in the sense of like, well, what does it mean that at some point it's going to become a majority minority country? Because that's the change that's going to be quote unquote profound. And will that be reflected in who has power and who has wealth? And then that kind of, then when you get to the humanist question of, well, what has that been looking like in humanist communities? Do humanist communities reflect that question? And then also, I think, ethical problem, or where we are working towards a society that is going to still be have extreme wealth disparities and extreme differences in power and representation, as also that it's to this extent that it won't be representative. Who has power and where money goes and where money is spent won't look like or potentially positively impact less folks who are in the quote unquote majority. And I don't know, it's humanism dealing with that question, or that potential problem, or that continuation of a problem. Like we still, like whether it's like we cross that line between majority, minority or not, right? There's still like, you know, in terms of looking at how much wealth Blacks have compared to whites, looking at how much money men make compared to women, or the white men make compared to Black women or Hispanic women, right? All these different ways of breaking it down. And it's like, the question is also then like, well, what does our community look like or doing, you know, to answer that? And I think I think that's an open question. I think that if we're looking at things happening, and also it's not a thing that's always going to be comfortable and easy. I mean, if examining what's happening with the AHA, something that James Croft has been writing about, something that also like there are folks who have been organizing in different aspects of diversity, in terms of folks who've been organizing on the queer side, folks of color side, right, are pushing and trying to hold the AHA accountable in certain kind of ways. Even as the AHA has made a sort of pledge to replace their executive director with a person of color, right? So this is a thing that is going to be a kind of continuous struggle or a continuous question. It's never really going to have an answer. But this is up to us, the people who are part of this community. And I'm not going to leave out ethical culture that too, because ethical culture has the same questions and issues, right, that they have to deal with and confront as they, you know, as we continuously are looking at our communities and say, do they represent, or we're working towards the things that we claim or espouse?
Yeah, it's kind of, are you talking about humanism with a big H, or, you know, with a little h, or yeah, everything in between?
Right. I see the next question is American humanism representative of welcoming to young people who are leaving organized religion as greatest number. One of the reasons why I wanted to make this talk is that I wanted folks to try to give people maybe some kind of either, I don't know, language or inspiration to ask these questions and maybe organize in a way that makes our communities appealing to people who may be questioning that, like, you know, their emphasis may not be on whether God exists or not. That's not their emphasis. Their emphasis may just be like, can I not feel alone, and can I be in community, and can I be working towards things that are important to me? Mm-hmm. am I doing things in a way that are making the people that I want to be connected with, or how I identify, feel honored and valued? Are they moving towards the communities, or feel welcoming towards the communities I feel connected to, want to feel connected to? So, because I we're not proselytizers general. I think that's a general thing I can say that's true. As true as something can be, right? We don't really proselytize. So we're never going to go out and say, this is some way that's going to feel way better than what you ever left, or way better than being alone. But I think there's a way that we can be and act and engage with the world that to say, I could feel at home here. It's Anthony Penn has this term of safe landing, right? What does it mean for humanism to be safe landing for Black Americans, right? And is that where that question is rooted? But I think that question could be rooted in phrase for trans folks. I think that question could be rooted in phrase for sex workers. I think that rooted, like, it's for all these people who are that groups have never been welcoming to, that organized in a certain kind of way. That I feel like that are folks who could feel at home here, but we also have to make it someplace that they could feel at home.
Mm-hmm. And welcome that diversity in thought, and realize it as a strength, and humanism is my religion, and I belong to a humanistic congregation at the Ethical Society of St. Louis, and just having a community that helps me and supports me while I strive to live my values. I don't always live my values. I'm a human, but just to know that we're kind of all striving to live our values and coming together, and we have the support of one another, and how much stronger we are together in a congregation.
Hey, yeah. Jesse, representing Susquehanna. Nice to see you.
So Jesse
speak how the definition of humanism for young people might be different than definition for people in privilege. I want to start with that. I think that the answer to that question starts with that Big Shug, that quote of what is it, like, loving one's flesh, like, and it's not. I mean, what's interesting about that passage is what happens in that passage, and then what happens later in the book, where the community kind of organize and they bring the clearing to Setha when Setha is in a moment of pain. So they make an intentional choice to meet the needs of their community with that kind of love that is not like age restricted. It's not religious restricted. It's not, because some folks in the community, they don't agree. Some use like little, like, some might call, quote unquote, like traditional pagan kind of things, or voodoo. Some are Christian. Some are just like, care about other people, and they don't care. They're just like, all right, well, this is a problem and we're going to meet it. I think, and this is and I think, because it's, on one hand, there is definitely trauma that comes from breaking from religion, breaking from, or being kind of isolated because of one's non-religious or non-theistic beliefs. At the same time, because I feel like, speaking as a person who went to Baptist church, I continued going to church. It was almost as a social formality, but until like I was 20. And because it was also the place that they had supported in some ways my educational trajectory. They had also given me a place to practice public speaking. If I'm an okay public speaker, it is not small part because they let me speak in front of people when I was, 11, 12 years old, right? They let me try to recite the I Have a Dream speech, right? And so there's a way that community fostered me, even if I still say I don't believe in what they, other aspects. And another way that, like, when I heard politics in the pulpit, right, where people were talking about, I remember a sermon about, like, Princess Diana. I remember a sermon about sort of like the beginnings of Black Lives Matter, and sort of I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and Avenue Louima and stuff like that. So there was in this place that the church dealt with all of this. The church dealt with the range of what a community needs, and so for young folks, and it's particularly for Black, Indigenous, or people of color, right? It's not really. I don't think the question is like whether humanism or religion. I think it's like what feels like a regenerative space that is radically accepting. I think maybe starting there, right? And that supports, like I kind of mentioned before, growth and maybe moving towards my maybe desire to learn, things like that. All those things that are like the core of what we do, making sure that's accessible. And I think that's the main thing. I think that's what young people in Black and Indigenous people of color are concerned about. But I also don't speak for everyone. People may have different concerns. I mean, people are coming from very different sort of backgrounds. So I don't want to say that, but from my experience, I know was like key. I think it's probably why I ended up at the Ethical Society and not somewhere else in terms of continuously coming, because it was about the things that I cared about. So yeah, but there's definitely also people of color who and Black Indigenous folks who are probably staunchly atheists, probably staunchly, humanists, and they're like, I live in Philadelphia. Sorry. So I don't want to discount that, but I do think that there is like if there's a difference, maybe there's maybe less concern about the divide and more about what's happening in the community.
And kind of what are our common goals and what ethical action can we take, to get there. And it's personal and it's also very communal. And I think something you're touching on is that humanism is really hard to define, and it involves, many aspects that you figure out for yourself, right? Because you're not being told what to believe or, the dogma to chant and recite. But, that creates its challenges too, because we, as human beings, we are ritualistic people, right? So we like to mark time and events and milestones with rituals. So that presents its own unique challenges to humanist communities.
I would think the goal, right, is to try to build something where people can come to from their own pathways, their own streams, right? This is like if for you humanism is like having a potluck and talking about a good movie, that like, at the same time, my humanism is like reading sci-fi books and nerding out, right? They're not in conflict. They're just like they're articulated differently, but there's some threads. And I think that's the key. Oh, this is hard. Wow, Jesse.
So Jesse asks, how do you feel about the sarcastic humor and pointing out the contradictions in certain religions on social media as put forth by many humanist-based groups? So I think this is like a multi-faith question, right?
You know what? I'm going to ground this in Ghana because I'll talk about this from a sort of like how I react to my Ghanaian folks. My folks who are Ghanaian humanists / atheists, secularists, they are extremely brave because they, being humanists or sort of a non-believer of any type, has impacts on jobs, family, dating life, every part of, like the things that I go through, and like, getting mad at my mother because she's like, what are you doing? Whatever, is nothing compared to what my folks in Ghana have to go through. With that said, they do approach a very confrontational stance. They make very dry jokes, like very pretty directed, but it's important because I think it speaks to truth to power. Like it's about speaking truth to power. It's like, oh, like do you feel like, for instance, when I was mentioning that part about this sort of person being attracted to the same person in Ghana, there's this very big thing going on with the LGBTQ office that was closed down by the president, and it served as a safe haven. And homosexuality is technically illegal in Ghana, but it's never really prosecuted, and it's hard to prosecute. The same, whatever. But it was like the thing that is prosecuted is like carnal knowledge, and so they'll say, well, oral sex is falls under carnal knowledge. So should you be in jail, right? For a person in terms of like to have a sexual life. So this is kind of like, and this is the thing is it's like, as a rhetorical tool, it's very powerful because it forces the media, it forces the people to have to say like, oh, you're right. Because you're saying it in a way that like, the society is expecting you not to want to say it because they know that the danger or the like sort of like cost that can come. And so when you have people that are doing it, it's like, oh no, like they're not worried about that. And so people have to meet it. So and in that, like I have come to understand that even though it's not my route, I really appreciate and admire them for their courage.
And a humanist approach too would also be to attack the idea and not the individual. So, right, you go after the bad thought or the prejudice or the practice or the repression, or instead of going after someone's personal attributes or
I just one more comment. I mean, I do think there are things that are done in particularly poor taste that I think are like, I mean, and this is not to say that like whatever happened was warranted. I'm thinking of the Charlie, the newspaper in France, or like the kind of things that they run there, because they're also the things that they run are not really just meant to be offensive to like people who have a religion, but also people who are in sort of a left liberal kind of stance. So they had a magazine cover where the Queen was stepping on Meghan Markle's neck, and Meghan Markle was saying, "I can't breathe." Right. And so that was, and that was meant to be offensive. It was meant to be like, oh, like to touch off like snowflakes, whatever the word is in French for snowflakes, Alan might know. And so they, and so like stuff like that, it's like, what are you really attacking? Are you attacking someone's other, like being different? Or are you really trying to make an appeal for some kind of justice? So that's that. And then Alan asked, why do I feel more free in Ghana? So there is a lot actually to that question. And this is when I say it's important to understand and question one's definition of freedom. Because my definition, why I was able to move in Ghana as freely as I was because of, in a sense, my privilege of having an American passport. My privilege also as being a man, and my privilege of also being straight. So now I got stuff for having dreadlocks. Dreadlocks are also another news story in Ghana. Like there was a kid kicked out of school or not allowed to school because he was Rastafarian kids, and they grow their hair in Ghana. Like when you're in secondary school, usually boys and girls and others shave their heads. So there was this whole controversy because a young person was not allowed in school because they had locks. Right. So I got some stuff for my locks, but generally I was able to move freely in the country because of sort of my gender and also sort of sexuality as well as like country location. Right. But I think there's another part of that of like compared to the US. Right. And I was talking about police officers. Right. Police officers are annoying in Ghana because it's usually like if they're talking to you, they're going to like want a bribe or something. Right. Or they want to try to get some kind of way to like extract money from you. So for instance, like smoking cigarettes on the street is a fine. So one of my friends was in a car and they had the window open, the smoke came out and the police officer was smiling. It's very different feeling that annoyance than feeling like my life is in danger if a cop is scared of me. Or if I do something that they don't like. right? So that, and sort of that, in the aspect of being free, that is kind of what I talked about. I'm feeling more free in God. Like there's some things I don't have to worry about in that degree.
Thank you. Do you want to leave us with any final thoughts? I guess last call for questions for Christian.
Yeah, I'm open to a question.
Do you want to speak to some of the questions you asked at the end of your talk? Kind of where you
I was like, what did I say? No, I'm just kidding.
Because I think
it's probably
a really interesting question.
To ask what like I think there's I think sometimes we're scared to say that, and particularly in ethical culture, I'm not going to say humanism. I'm going to say ethical culture. Ethical culture is really, to me, a moral philosophy that is centered around a concept of love, whether that's civic love or a kind of ethic realizable through love, and whether that's love for one society, one's for love from partner, one's for love children, one for love family, all these different aspects of like, if you love someone, and this is kind of like spelled out in different people, whether it's Bell Hooks or Brene Brown, kind of like loving someone is kind of being invested in their spiritual development or their ability to manifest and become who they are. It's like not simply taking care of them, not simply giving them, right? And I think I'm gonna, step on a limb that ethical culture is about like figuring out how to love people. And so, but I feel like it's not quite our culture to quite say that out loud. And I think by extension, like humanism is a little about love. And so as we start asking ourselves, well, why that is, one, but then two, what does it look like for me to be a more loving human being in the world? And again, for me, what does it look like for me, right? It's not like rejecting phone calls from your family for you, right? So maybe that's for you. For me, there's a love in it. It just looks different, right? Love people or accept people. That's a good question, Charles.
Yeah, Charles.
That's a good question.
Kind of love versus acceptance.
And that's a good question. I think you should think about that, right? I think that's the thing. Is it's like how far should that love extend, and what does it mean to love in that extended way, right? Because I think that is really, and we talk about, there are concerns that I think humanism has. I think humanism has concerns with liberation, right? That's why we might, bang with existentialists, right? We have concerns about knowledge, learning, right? Why we bring up pragmatists, right? But I think there's also this aspect of love. So that's one, right? So I encourage, right? Maybe not ignore that part of the speech. It may not be the less appealing one. It may be a little uncomfortable, but, think about it. The other part, the futures. I really consider my spiritual practice very recently to start reading sci-fi and consistently, because I think it's important to think about what people are thinking, where our society is going and where it's heading. And then for us to try to be invested in thinking about affecting where it's going. And I think we're doing that. I think we want to do that, but I think it has to be something that's like louder. Like I think it has to be louder and more pronounced. That we are invested in making a future that is like, that looks like something different than what we are heading towards.
And I think that kind of reminds me of that Cornel West quote that justice is what love looks like in public. So I think that also speaks to like our social justice, ethical action, and kind of centering ourselves in making the world a more just and fair place for all people.
And I don't want to like skimp out on that middle question, which I was about to skimp out on, but like how we define it, because like Louise said, there are a lot of humanism sort of figuring out what it is a kind of personal journey. But knowing and understanding that we are limited in our perceptibility as humans, just naturally. I can't see behind me that much to the side of me, right? And so it might be important to figure out or understand and come to appreciate how other people are forming their connection to humanism. And because that might shape, I'd hate to use a Bible reference, or sharpen the iron of like what you calling your humanism, right? And so that's 6:55, I think. I mean, well, 3:55 or 5:55, depending on where you are. Trying to get a wide spectrum. I think that's a good place to end with a poorly timed Bible.
And I think that also speaks to why everybody showed up, to kind of get your perspective on this dynamic humanism and how important it is to listen to one another and kind of gather these perspectives and help them recognize our own perspectives as well. So I just want to take this last moment to thank you so much. I've really appreciated our conversation and your talk. Thank you to all of our attendees. And I really appreciate you showing up today.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you all. Oh,
Yes.
Look, all that say, what is Cisco Hunter doing? I need to come see y'all in physical,
A lot of ethical culture
Okay.
people here showing some support.
Wendy, what? That's so interesting. It's so good to see you. Oh wow, there are a lot of ethical culture folks here.
Yes, thank you for coming.
I hope I represented well.
Okay, everyone, enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Bye.